A very good afternoon to all in this webinar to Face Pulse. Welcome to episode of our webinars exclusively for TPO community. In today's webinar, we promised to tackle a very important question. Is aptitude still relevant in campus recruitments? I'm sure this is an interesting question for various reasons, but the reason we put it up as a topic for discussion today was because we had, over the last few years, seen a decreasing trend in terms of students preparing for aptitude, in terms of TPOs being worried about aptitude training, and overall the move from aptitude to technology training in terms of the significance that is placed in the campus recruitment process. I'm sure all of you attending from the TPO community are already aware of the shifts in campus recruitment test patterns and the kind of skills and topics that are assessed. However, aptitude still is a component. Whether it's relevant or not is a secondary point, still is a component of many tests. So we are here to understand the evolution of aptitude tests, where it started, where it is now, what are companies doing with regards to testing aptitude skills, why are they doing it. We're going to check all of that and finally pose a question: what can we do in this new scenario? How do we understand the role of aptitude and accordingly help our students in this particular space? So I am Vijay Anand. I'm one of the vice presidents here at FACE. I handle training products. I'm joined by Mr. Karthik Raja, who handles, he's the vice president at FACE as well. He handles technology training at FACE. So together, the two of us are going to have a discussion on this. We welcome questions from the audience and we hope to take them towards the end of the session. Now we have a few slides Karthik has designed so that we can get started in a very structured manner, and then we want to have a very fireside kind of a chat in a bit more casual environment. So over to you, Karthik, to get started, set the context, and then we'll open the floor for some discussion.
Thanks, Vijay. So, as Vijay had set the context, I'll do a quick presentation where I'm going to be talking about what aptitude test is and where do we find aptitude test in today's recruitment scenario. To start with, let's start with this typical question of what is tested in aptitude assessments. Now, most of you from the training and placement fraternity might be familiar with this, but still I'll take a minute to explain this. Basically, an aptitude assessment is a problem-solving test. Now, see, typically the kind of questions asked in aptitude are categorized into three categories. Questions based on quantitative aptitude, logical reasoning, and verbal ability. Now, quantitative aptitude questions are numerical questions. Typically, you find questions from algebra, your arithmetic questions, geometry-based questions, etc. But what happens here is, while the syllabus defined is 10 standard level mathematics, see, when aptitude is concerned, when you say aptitude, you find aptitude in a variety of exams. Placements, definitely it's there. But in addition to placements, over the years, you find it in so many other places also, right? Including exams like GATE. Even you have it in civil services today. CAT has been using it for a long time. In all these cases, the syllabus defined this 10 standard level math and English. Okay, so the topics whatever you would have learned in 10 standard level maths is what gets tested here. But the questions that are asked here will have certain specific characters. One, these are application based questions. They will not be direct formula based questions. Second, these questions can be solved faster without writing a lot of steps. So somebody who takes a math approach to this will start writing a lot of steps and might end up taking more time. Now, typically an aptitude test will not have enough time to complete the test. No, so most of the cases, right, somebody who clears an aptitude test might score just about 45 to 55% of the total marks, and that would be your cutoff for the particular assessment, right? So these are exams which are application based questions which can be solved faster if you do not write steps. Okay, so quants is largely math based questions. Logical reasoning are puzzle kind of questions, or they might be questions involving everyday items like clocks, cubes, directions, blood relations kind of things. And verbal ability is an assessment of the candidate's language skills and application of the same. So you have questions from areas like reading comprehension, critical reasoning in terms of the given arguments, how does he understand it, Then you have questions based on grammar as well as vocabulary. When I say grammar and vocabulary, they're not going to ask you very direct, as in what is the grammatical error here kind of a question, but rather in a particular context, they'll ask the student to spot the error or the most appropriate sentence. Similarly, vocabulary, again, you might have direct questions like antonyms, synonyms, but you'll also have a lot of questions where you have single blank paragraphs given, multiple blank paragraphs given, and things like that. So students' verbal ability gets tested here. Now, typically, most of the aptitude tests will have these three as separate sections, and each of these sections will have a sectional cutoff. So what do we mean by sectional cutoff? For example, a test has got 20 quants questions, 20 logical questions, and 20 verbal questions. Each right answer carries 1 mark. There will also be negative marking for wrong answers. The reason why there is negative marking for wrong answers is to discourage students from guessing. Otherwise, what happens? A lot of students will answer all the questions, irrespective of whether they know the answer or not. To discourage students from doing that, there will definitely be negative marking. So put together, the net score is expected to be a particular score, which is called a sectional cutoff. So for example, they might have a quants cutoff of 10, logical cutoff of 10, and verbal cutoff of 10. And there might be an overall cutoff of, let's say, 25 in all the three sections put together. So even if I get 40 marks in total, if I have not got the required 10 marks in quants, I will not clear this assessment. That's sectional cutoff. So sectional cutoff is given for each of these sections, quants, logical, and verbal. I need to clear the sectional cutoff of all these three, and I also need to clear the overall cutoff. So only if I clear all the sectional cutoffs and the overall cutoff, I would have cleared the aptitude round. Now, this is one of the common mistakes that we find students making. So typically in engineering colleges, what happens is we find a lot of students to be good in quants and logical. Some students find verbal to be very difficult. They focus more on quants in terms of learning as well as in terms of taking the assessment. And they eventually end up not clearing the verbal round. They would get overall very good total scores. And what happens is, in a lot of cases when colleges conduct these tests also, right, they only look at the overall score for ranking or for deciding how many students have cleared. A lot of students miss out because of sectional cutoff. That's one area that we need to be careful about. So this is how a typical aptitude assessment happens. Now let's look at how kind of assessments evolved as far as IT recruiters are concerned. Now the reason why I'm kind of starting with IT recruiters is, back in late 90s, early 2000s is when the concept of campus recruitments as something started really catching on. See, before that, the number of engineering colleges that we had in India itself was very, very, very less. So the kind of advent of private engineering colleges, and they're really growing, started happening in the late 90s and early 2000s. That started happening because you had a huge boom in the IT sector in India. See, before that, kind of whatever companies' IT requirements were, they were trying to develop it in their own countries. And probably like what you expect, the Western countries were the ones which were kind of had their IT requirements booming. And the cost of manpower there is unimaginably high. You do it at a fraction of the cost if the same project can be modularized and developed in India. TCS Infosys being the pioneers in doing that, they needed a large workforce who can do this. And they had amazing margins when this business really started doing well in the 90s and 2000s. So when you say business was doing really well, just imagine a scenario where most of these companies used to have 20 to 25% of their total employees on the bench. That's, if there are 100 employees working, there will be 20 to 25 people who do not have projects, who are just sitting there and waiting for new projects to come in. Now, these companies had massive training budgets back then. A typical new entrant would undergo training for anywhere between 6 to 9 months. And after that, he's on the bench for some time, and easily most of these people get into a project only after a year of them joining the company. Right? Companies had that kind of margins to afford it. So basically, companies wanted people whom they consider as trainable. So if a particular candidate is considered trainable means what? I can teach him programming skills and then I can put him on the job. Companies never expected anybody to know programming skills back then. So how do I know whether this guy can learn programming or not? They looked at problem solving as a substitute skill. So what is problem solving? So if I give you a problem, can you solve that? Can you kind of try to understand the logic behind it and try to come up with a solution for it? So initial days, there was a puzzle-based test which was happening. I still remember early 2000s, Infosys used to have a set of 10 questions. And most of these questions used to come from popular puzzle books back then. So most of the final year students would keep preparing for these exams from a book, which was puzzles book written by Dr. Shakuntala Devi. Most of you might even remember that name, right? So that's how the preparation was there. So any student who gets into final year kind of started preparing for puzzles, and puzzles was the way the recruitments happened. So they used to get a question paper with 10 questions, they write the answer. And back then recruiters used to come with a team of question paper evaluators. So once the test is done, they used to sit, kind of correct this with their hands, and then give the marks. Right? This is how the whole thing started back in the early 2000s. So slowly what happened? They started finding out that people needed not just logical reasoning skills, they also wanted verbal skills. Right? So they moved into aptitude tests, which had 3 sections: quants, logical reasoning, and verbal ability. And 10 questions was not sufficient to segregate students. So they moved into a model where you used to get between 40 to 60 questions, 1 to 1.5 hours test. And they started using OMR sheets. Basically, as in today, because most of the assessments are happening online, you rarely see OMR sheets, but then they're typically sheets where you have with 4 to 5 responses for each of these questions. So that was given to students. So initial days of OMR sheets, they used to have a template which they used to put it on the answer sheet, and then still manual evaluation was happening for some time. And then slowly you had the advent of scanners which could read OMR sheets, and kind of recruiters, when they come to campus, they used to bring the scanning machines to campus, so that then and there they can do the evaluation. On the second day, they can do the interviews. So it kind of started. 2010s, if I remember correctly, 2011 is when TCS started doing its online aptitude test. Now this kind of really simplified things for people, because you didn't have the massive headache of bringing so many question papers and OMR sheets and manually kind of scanning them, etc. So slowly aptitude became a online test, and slowly all the other recruiters also started using online aptitude tests. And this simplified a lot of things, because as in colleges had the computer infrastructure to conduct these tests, and it became so much more easier. Now once online tests started coming in, right, that's where we started seeing a lot of changes happening to assessments. Like for example, these companies always wanted to evaluate the communication skills of candidates. While that was happening during the interview rounds, they also wanted to do that screening before the interviews happen. See, for companies, it's a huge cost to do a lot of face-to-face interviews. So they would like to kind of do as much screening as possible during the previous rounds. See, at the end of the day, their interviews used to happen by people who are at the project manager level. So a project manager's time is very costly for the IT services companies. So what happens? So they kind of came up with this writing assessment. And because you started using an online test platform, these were automatically evaluated. So people with good aptitude and people with good communication skills were the people who were shortlisted for subsequent rounds. See, till this point, right, till probably 2014-15, you rarely had technical questions being asked in any stage of the interview process. But then that's where the IT industry also had so much of competition from smaller companies coming in India as well as abroad. And there was a huge margin squeeze that the IT services companies were facing. So that was the point where they had to do something in terms of getting better talent. And see, naturally, this margin pressure started reflecting in terms of the bench strength of IT companies. And that was also kind of reflecting in terms of how long were they kind of being put on training. So the average duration of somebody who was being put on a training started reducing to typically 3 months, 4 months, etc. That's when a lot of companies also started kind of experimenting models like train and hire, etc. Cognizant was training that in the mid 2010s, 2015 kind of. So then what happened? You also had the kind of advent of these IT product companies. See, these IT product companies, right, they typically had their own kind of IT products. They wanted extremely strong coders who will be able to kind of code and develop products for large volumes, which means they wanted people who did not just know basic programming. They also wanted people who were very good in data structures and algorithms. Now that as a talent was very, very, very minimally available. And most of these recruiters at that point in time started hiring from IITs and NITs. See, before that and all, you used to hear fancy salaries for fresh graduates, largely from IIMs, right? So typically a fresher getting a 20 lakh per annum salary, 30 lakh per annum salary used to happen only from the IIMs. Now with the advent of IT product companies, right, these companies were ready to pay very heavy salaries for fresh technical talent as long as they were very good, right? They were largely looking at people with very good technical problem solving skills. So that's where you started seeing coding questions. So you started the emergence of platforms like HackerRank, etc., where a coding question is given with test cases. The students can code in any language of their choice. Once they're able to code and pass the test cases, they clear and go to the next round. So parallelly, at this point in time, IT service companies, because of whatever their business level challenges that we were talking about that they were facing, they had to kind of look for some amount of trainability on the technical side. Basically, the students had to have some technical orientation so they can quickly pick up these skills. So they started doing that in two ways. One is a lot of these interviews, right, had a technical interview. Prior to this, most of the interviews were only HR interviews. A few puzzles used to be asked there, but otherwise it was pure HR. Now you had a lot of technical interviews also coming in, and the IT service companies also had a lot of MCQ based assessments which were being asked. So this is again to kind of test whether the student has basic understanding of concepts. Still, application through coding questions was not being tested. Right. But today, over the last 3-4 years, you've seen that most of the IT service companies also have a coding round. So today, it's like more or less all the companies have it. So this is how we've seen the various kind of rounds of IT service companies emerge over the past few years. Now, today, because this is where we are, a lot of students think coding is the tougher round. Agreed, coding is the tougher round. So students kind of start obsessing about it, even college training placement officers, and they start planning, right? The first thing that they're thinking about is, okay, coding is the toughest round, so I should start training my people for coding rounds. But yeah, let's look at the assessment rounds of these major IT service companies in slightly greater detail to understand the patterns that they have as of today. See, earlier TCS had a writing round, but today it's no longer there. TCS earlier did not have a verbal ability round, but it is there. Now, if you look at it, right, I've broadly classified it into 3 categories, which is aptitude, communication skills, and programming. Now, in aptitude, you have these 3 rounds: quants, logical, and verbal. Now, if you look at these recruiters, right, in India, these are certain broad consensus level numbers that you have. Around 8.5 lakh engineering students are expected to graduate on an annual basis, and around 2 lakh students get recruited by IT companies. Now, out of these 2 lakh students who get recruited, right, close to 50,000 of them, 1 in 4 engineers who get recruited in IT companies get recruited in TCS. Now, earlier TCS used to visit campuses for hiring. Today, their model of hiring has completely changed. They conduct a national hiring test. All the students who are kind of doing their engineering in India are eligible to participate in that test. So today, at least one good thing is all engineering students in India have a fair chance of getting at least one very good opportunity, which is TCS. Wipro has also started conducting its own national hiring challenge. But then Wipro obviously does not make as many offers as TCS. So Wipro, Infosys, Accenture, Capgemini, Cognizant and all typically make probably anywhere between 12 to 20,000 offers in a year. Just to give you rough numbers. So put together, these 6 companies might offer anywhere between probably 1.1 to 1.4 lakh jobs in a given year. Just to give you a rough idea of what kind of numbers are we looking at. So these 6 companies put together easily make around 60% of the total IT job offers made in the country. Now let's look at these patterns. Of course, if you look at the next set of companies also, the patterns are very comparable and similar. From last year onwards, Capgemini started experimenting through a gamified assessment model, right, where quants and logical questions are asked in the form of games. There are 4 rounds with typically 6 to 9 minutes per round. Okay, that's an experiment that they're doing, and last year it kind of it was a hit in my view, because students enjoyed doing it because it was slightly different from aptitude. But then what was asked inside was again aptitude only, just that it was asked in a gamified manner. But other than that, it's pure play aptitude. And each and every one of these companies have an aptitude round, and the aptitude round is qualifying in nature. So when you say qualifying in nature, it means unless they crack that particular round, students will not qualify for the next round, right? In some cases, aptitude had a separate cutoff, programming had a separate cutoff, and the 2 tests were conducted together. But still, they had to clear the aptitude cutoff to go for subsequent rounds. So one very important thing that people need to keep in mind when they are looking at IT service companies is, while programming has also come in, that is an additional skill that the recruiters are looking at. It is not a replacement skill in the place of aptitude. So aptitude still holds its place as far as IT service companies recruitments are concerned. Now let's look at the rounds that IT product companies have. Now, very few of these IT product recruiters have an aptitude test. Now, Goldman Sachs is one of the few companies that conducts open hiring round for students across all campuses. They have the first round as an aptitude round, which is an elimination round. Subsequently, they have a programming round. But if you look at, but when Goldman Sachs visits colleges directly, in most cases, they don't have the aptitude round. It's a direct coding round. For a vast majority of these IT product companies and your dream, super dream companies, when they visit campuses, most of them do not have an aptitude round. They directly start with a coding round. Some of them have technical MCQs also, which is used to test conceptual understanding of students. But the single most important round, or a round that invariably every company has, is a coding round. In the coding round, the student's ability to solve problems is checked. Now, the difference between IT service companies and IT product companies as far as coding round is concerned is like what I said earlier. As far as IT service companies are concerned, they do not bother about how optimized your code is. As long as the code works, they're good with it. They're not going to test whether this code will kind of work for a very large set of numbers. But IT product companies expect the code to be optimized, right? So which means they're looking for the best possible solution for the problem given. And they're going to give you very limited amount of time to run the code. So which means unless your code is optimized for space and time complexity, a lot of cases you will not pass all the test cases. So IT product companies expect the students to come up with the most optimized code. That is the difference between IT service and product companies. So if the students have to write a kind of optimized code, they need a very good understanding of data structures and algorithms. But whereas somebody who's only targeting IT service companies will actually be able to do it without good understanding of data structures and algorithms, because he's only looking at writing the code. For some of you who are hearing this term data structures algorithms for the first time, data structures is nothing but kind of how students go about storing the given data. Algorithms is algorithmic techniques, which kind of helps them write more optimized code. Right. So once students crack the coding round, students have an interview round. See, earlier before COVID-19, you had whiteboard interviews where again a similar coding question is given to students, and then the interviewer will evaluate the student on how the student kind of goes about solving the question. Here, getting the right answer is not so much important, but then the thought process and how is he able to discuss the question with the interviewer is what matters. Now, today the same thing is happening through code share interviews. So the interviewer and the recruiter have the same screen on which a question and a coding window is present, and the student kind of quotes and explains it to the interviewer, and there are a lot of questions that are being asked. But if you look at it, right, while it's still coding which needs to be done, most important thing which kind of gets evaluated here is going to be the student's ability to solve the given problem. How does he approach the problem? Is he able to find out the optimal solution? Now, in a lot of these cases, the problems which are given are numerical in nature. So somebody who has good aptitude, again in aptitude what gets tested is problem solving skills. So if somebody has good aptitude, he will definitely be able to find it easier to come up with optimal solutions. So for that reason, having good aptitude is definitely helpful in preparing for IT product companies. But IT product companies are directly not going to ask aptitude. Now, I will explain this with the help of a couple of examples in terms of how will having good aptitude help solve coding questions. I'm going to take a couple of examples. These are questions that have been asked by recruiters in the previous years. I've not put the full question for the purpose of readability. I've put a very simplified version of it. So the first question is, find out whether the given number is a prime number or not. So for example, if the input given is 9, the students have to put the output as it is not a prime number. If the input is 23, they'll have to put the output as it is a prime number. This is how the question will read. But then the trick is they'll tell you the number can be up to 10 power 12, right? That's like massive number. Now, normally what every student will know, anyone who learns programming would have learned about prime numbers. So first thing he knows is, okay, a number if it is divisible only by 1 and itself, and it is not divisible by any other number, it is a prime number. So what will he do? He will try to kind of check whether this number is divisible or not by all values from 2 to this number minus 1. So if he checks for all numbers from 2 to this number minus 1, and it is not divisible by any value, then he will print it as it is not a prime number. But then just imagine he's going to run a loop to check for all values from 2 to number minus 1. If the number is 10 power 12, he needs to do it for 10 power 12 minus 1. So this way he's going to run a loop which will do 10 power 12 calculations. Okay. So in slightly technical terms, they would say the order complexity is O of n, because he's doing it for all the n values. But then somebody who understands basic aptitude will know that property of numbers. If a number is a prime number, it will definitely have one factor between 1 and root of n. If a number does not have a factor from 1 to square root of n, then the number is not a prime number because it will not have any factors at all. So in this case, instead of checking up to 10 power 12, he will check to square root of 10 power 12. Square root of 10 power 12 is 10 power 6. So which means he is going to now check by running a loop only from 2 to 10 power 6. So imagine he is not cutting the number of calculations by half. He's calculating it, but he's cutting it by square root of that number, which is instead of running 10 power 12 times, now he will run only 10 power 6 times. So he saves 10 power 6 calculations, which is massive. So the order complexity, which was earlier O of n, now becomes O of root n. Now the difference here is, for a question like this, right, which is on HackerRank or any other such recruitment portal, will have some 15-20 test cases given. Some 3-4 test cases will have very high values. The values with smaller test cases, even if you write the suboptimal code where you check from 1 to the number itself for divisibility, it will pass. But these numbers with higher values will not pass. That will be the difference between somebody who cracks this kind of assessment and who does not crack it. Now, let's explain this with the help of one more example. Right. So in this case, the last digit of a number is added to the rest of the number. And this process is continued till a single digit is arrived. Now they're explaining this with a number called 914. In 914, what is the last digit? 4 is the last digit. So you take away 4. What is the rest of the number? 91. So once you take away 4, the remaining number is 91. You take 4 and add it to 91. So the total is 91 plus 4, 95. Now you kind of keep on repeating this till you get a single digit number. So again 95, what is the last digit? 5. If you take away 5, the remaining number is only 9. So if you add 5 to 9, the total becomes 14. I still have 2 digits, so I have to repeat this again. So what happens? Now I take away 4. The rest of the number is 1. When I add 4 to 1, the total becomes 5. Now it is a single digit number. The answer is 5. Now again they've given you a line which says the value of this number can be up to 10 power 15. So which means every time I take one number and keep adding it to the rest of the number, right? If the number is as large as 10 power 15, every time one digit will keep reducing. So I will have to kind of keep doing this for 15 cycles. Okay. Now, so this is a solution of O of log n. Right. So, but I need to still do it 15 times. But then somebody who understands aptitude will know that, okay, so what are you doing? Every time you're taking a number and adding it to the rest of the digits. So this is as good as finding out the sum of the digits. Now straight away when you think of sum of the digits, what comes to your mind? 9 tables, right? Because you all know that if I add all the numbers and divide it by 9, or I keep on adding it till I get a single number, that operation is nothing but dividing that entire number by 9. Both of them are the same. So rather than writing a complex code to keep on separating the last digit and adding it to the rest of the number, I can just divide the given number by 9. Whatever is the remainder is going to be my answer. In this case, 914. If I divide it by 9, 900 is completely divisible by 9, no remainder. Then I have 14. 14 divided by 9, it will go once. The remainder is 5. That is the answer. So rather than doing this complex calculation, if I was good in aptitude, I can write a very, very easy solution. So this is how somebody who's good in aptitude will be able to do coding questions much, much better. This kind of helps for IT service companies as well as IT product companies. So while coding is directly not required for IT product companies, it helps improve the way students solve problems and hence the way they approach coding questions. Now let's look at what happens in non-IT recruitment roles. See, the first thing is, unlike IT companies, right? The non-IT companies, or which we call as core companies. What do we mean by core companies? See, for example, in civil, you'll talk about construction companies like L&T, Sri Infra, etc. If you look at mechanical recruiters like Nissan, Maruti, like this, every department has its own core companies. Now, between these core companies, right, there is no standard process. See, it again depends upon how many years the recruiter has been in market for, how large is the size of the company, how many offers do they make in a year. Because typically smaller companies, right, they don't have a standard process. Year on year, it kind of changes. But the large ones have a fairly standard process. The established recruiters, what you observed is, invariably they will have two rounds. One is an aptitude test and the other is a technical MCQ. So if they're looking for electrical engineers, they will find the MCQ test in electrical engineering. If they're looking for mechanical engineers, there'll be a round in mechanical engineering. So typically, the kind of questions that get asked in the technical round is very similar to what gets asked in gate round, one level lower. And these recruiters also look at aptitude. See, the reason why they look at aptitude is simple. They also want people who are smarter, people with good problem solving skills. So aptitude is the closest proxy that you have to kind of evaluate and identify people with good problem solving skills. Then they typically do a technical interview. If the candidate clears the technical interview, they finally do a HR interview. Now, unlike IT service companies, in core companies, technical interview carries way more weightage. And it's a slightly tougher round to crack than the HR interview round. Most cases, HR interview is more like a formality here. And communication skills are not given as much importance as your IT companies, because here people kind of tend to work with, mostly they have Indian clients, they have Indian suppliers, most of the people working are also Indians. So language barrier is not expected to be high. Unlike your IT companies, where they're typically expected to kind of have a client facing role if they're on projects. They might have to interact with people from different nationalities, countries, etc. So it's very different here. So these are the processes that happen. But then typically, if you're looking at any established core recruiter, they will have a aptitude round. All right. So now going back to the title of the seminar, is aptitude still relevant in campus recruitment? So I will quickly summarize the major points that we saw so far. So first thing that we saw is, for IT service companies, almost all the recruiters have an aptitude round. We saw that for the top 6 recruiters, who kind of together make more than 60-65% of the offers in the IT services space put together. Now, most of the established core companies also have a aptitude round. As far as IT product companies are concerned, they might not have an aptitude round, but then being good in aptitude will help improve the problem solving skills, which will in turn make them better at technical problem solving, right? So I think when we look at these things, right, it is fairly clear that while students are expected to prepare for coding round also and develop those skills, students still need to be good in aptitude, because if they're not good in aptitude, they're not even going to make it to interviews, or they're not even going to make it to coding rounds as far as IT service companies are concerned. Same case applies for core companies. And for IT product companies, this is something which will be an advantage for them. So I think the way we need to look at it is, yes, there needs to be a focus on training students for technical programming skills, but we should definitely kind of do the necessary training for aptitude also. I think it needs to be balanced well. And one other important thing, like what we saw, is you definitely kind of need to plan to do aptitude training before technical training. Right. So see, today most of you who are attending might be in a particular stage as far as your final year students and pre-final year students are concerned. The final year students who are going to be passing out in 2022, right? If you have already done aptitude training for them, great. But if it's not yet done, right, I think you need to kind of start planning for their aptitude training as soon as possible. Typically 60 hours, 10 days of training is all that is required for a student to master aptitude, and he will be ready for these recruitments. Now, when I say 10 days, right, in a lot of colleges, probably the semester exam is not yet done. Every day, half a day college is happening, etc. So in a lot of our client colleges, what we're doing is typically colleges are happening only in the morning since the COVID outbreak. Afternoon students are free. So a lot of them are using that time to invest for aptitude training for students. So they do the 10-day training module with us. And after that, we support students with a lot of assessments and practice. And they continuously keep practicing for that so that the skill kind of keeps improving. Now, if you think you might not have sufficient time to do this 10-day training, the next best alternative that I would suggest is each of these companies have a specific type of questions that they ask. See, while aptitude is aptitude, but still the nature of questions, type of questions are different. For example, TCS typically comes up with very long questions, where even reading the questions is going to take a little bit of time and it's going to be more complex. Whereas Tech Mahindra, the questions are very straightforward and easier, but they expect students to solve more number of questions and so on. So you can plan for whichever recruiters are going to visit your college and start training students particularly for that particular company. And like what I said, if no company is visiting your college, still it's not a major problem because you still have TCS as well as Wipro, which is going to give an opportunity to all the students. You can start preparing your students specifically for TCS aptitude and Wipro's aptitude. As far as 2023 and 24 batches are concerned, that's the current second and third years. If you think, as in you've still not started training, right? I think you should look at training them a little earlier. And my personal view is that it's better to finish off aptitude training before you start technical training. See, in certain places, it kind of happens hand in hand. Both of them are happening in a balanced manner. But if possible, I would kind of request you to finish off aptitude a little earlier because aptitude is again fundamental problem solving skills, which helps a student build his kind of technical problem solving skills also. Because technical problem solving also has a lot of numerical based questions. So if you can finish off aptitude, that will help students do well in technical training. So results, we found it in a lot of colleges to be better when aptitude training is completed before students take up the technical training. So a couple of standard good practices that I continuously keep suggesting is conduct assessments, plenty of assessments with sectional cutoffs when you do the training for aptitude, right? So the reason why I continuously say do assessments is a lot of times students kind of listen in an aptitude class the way they would listen in a theory-based class and think they understand it. But unfortunately, that's not how it works. Now, aptitude is a skill that improves with practice. So it's not knowledge, it is skill. So students need to do a lot of practice. So once they start taking tests is when they really know where they stand. So they can continuously go back and keep practicing. So we will have to encourage our students to keep practicing, take assessments, know where they stand in different areas. Wherever they are weak, go back, learn more, practice more, take more assessments. See, aptitude as a skill is a very coachable, buildable skill. It can be done in a very short span of time, provided students are being guided correctly, right? So even if final students have still not started their preparation and we expect campus placements to start probably, see, DXC Technologies is expected to start their campus placements by early July, right? Probably TCS might conduct digital sometime in July, August. Probably by end of August, we might even have TCS Ninja happening this year. So students might have about 2.5 months time to prepare. So even if students are going to start fresh now, they still have sufficient time, provided we just help them with the right guidance. Yeah, this is what I wanted to talk about. Now we can have the floor open for questions.
Thank you, Karthik, for taking us through that presentation. I think it was an in-depth expose on the evolution of aptitude skills. And I also believe that now we've got a resounding answer to that question. Is aptitude still relevant in campus recruitment? I think the answer is a resounding yes. It might differ slightly based on the context, which is if you're looking at aptitude for IT product aspirants, then while aptitude may not be directly tested, it could help improve outcomes for people sitting only for product rounds. But overall, aptitude skill is a necessity that you have to still worry about, while there is an additional, requirement of technology training. So with that, I'll open the floor for questions and comments and discussion. All right, Mr. Anil, I will. So we have a lot of programs, sir, and we will be sure to reach out to you individually and then let you know how to plan for this program. So a lot of factors go into deciding the cost, whether it's online or offline, how many, what is the batch size, etc. So we will get back to you directly, sir. Mr. Ravi is asking, how do we, accommodate students with differing levels of aptitude, skills, and knowledge in such a training program for 10 days? Karthik, do you want to take that?
Yes, Vijay. So, sir, what we do in such cases is we typically start with a diagnostic test. So, diagnostic test will kind of help us understand where the student is in terms of his skill levels today. So, when we kind of do training in most of the colleges, we first conduct the diagnostic test and we understand where they stand. And we do a alpha, beta, gamma classification of students so that there is a tailored course which runs for each of these different groups of students. So typically we can do aptitude training anywhere between 3 to 15 days, depending on where the current student stands. So we do this assessment, we classify them depending on their current skill level, and then we start the training program for them, sir.
Right. So I'd like to add on to what Karthik has just mentioned. In a physical classroom training setup, it's actually logistically difficult to accommodate different timetables, getting all students bunched into a classroom, getting them shuffle across different classrooms, etc. At least in this pandemic with online training, such classifications and groupings have become easier. And since last year, whatever training we have done in aptitude, where the college itself asked us to separate batches according to existing proficiency, we've been able to do it online very smoothly. And even in some places where we have not customized the content, the trainer is able to go in a particular speed which is standard for that particular classroom full of students. So the trainer need not speed up or slow down to cater to specific pockets of students. The speed is normal and the batch is able to adapt. So that is something that we have observed across institutions. It's also easier to do a different kind of a grouping apart from their standard classes. I have another question from Mrs. Mugdha. How do we, teach communication skills which are relevant for placements?
Right. So here what we do is, as far as communication skills are concerned, the key thing is practice matters as much as kind of what they learn. So we have a program called Communication Confidence. So where the idea is to build communication confidence in students first. See, a lot of cases, the inhibition of the students never allows them to come and speak. So we don't even really know how good the students are. So first is we kind of build a lot of confidence in students. We do it by conducting a lot of activities in the class where students don't even feel that they're coming up and speaking. It's more like a game that they're participating in where they kind of start speaking in English. That's the first level. So we kind of bring them out of their inhibitions and we kind of start them to speak freely. Then we take them through a course on grammar where, so first is you've broken inhibitions around whatever confidence issues they might have. Then you teach them on speaking correctly. So they continue to participate in activities where they're speaking, but now they started to speak correctly also. Then we kind of take them through basic preparation required for interviews. So where you train them on how to write a resume, how do you participate in GDs, how do you participate in interviews, what should be your body language, what are the do's and don'ts, how should your answers be framed, etc. So these three courses put together will make somebody kind of completely ready as far as communication skills for interviews are concerned.
Thank you, Karthik. I would also like to share a best practice which is followed in certain institutions. Most often the students fall into the TPO influence only in the pre-final year, but English language is a particular skill set which takes a lot of time to pick up, a lot of time and effort to pick up, both from the student as well as the teachers. Aptitude, on the other hand, if you ask me teach time and work for a student, I can do it in 3 hours, and after 3 hours, the student is proficient in time and work. So aptitude skills are easy to pick up, whereas skills such as technology and English language take a lot of time, effort, and practice to develop. So what we have observed in some institutions is that because TPOs are picking up the students for training only in the pre-final year after 6th semester, the influence, or rather the ambit for training the students before that, is given to some other department, probably the science and humanities department or the individual departments themselves, CSE, mechanical, etc. they take ownership of that and they put them through a proper English language training program with a desired outcome, which is your CEFR grade outcome, which is a scale of English language. If you take IELTS, it is band 1 to 9, and you are expected to get at least a 7 band. Some people go for Cambridge Beg certification, some people go for other exams, standardized exams, which can also help. So if you or the management or the principals attending, you have a sphere of influence which is much wider than the third year and final year, you could potentially start targeting some of these standardized exams, which can then flow on to the English language skills, communications, confidence, etc. Plus, students have a certificate in their hands which tells them about their current English language level. So this is just a best practice that I just wanted to share. I think we have time for a few more questions in case you wish to ask. Okay, I've got one more question. Okay. How different is placement aptitude from higher education exam aptitude? Karthik, would you like to?
Sure. See, again, it's still fundamental aptitude which is being asked here. But if you look at the purpose of higher education aptitude, right? When you look at higher education aptitude, largely people refer to CAT, which is a pure aptitude-based exam, and GATE, which has some 15% weightage in aptitude. This is on one side. Whereas the aptitude that you find in recruitments in colleges, right? Typically, it's like a pure aptitude test. Now you have programming also getting added to it. Now, if you look at the difference, right? Now, typically in the ones that you find as far as academic purposes are concerned, that's higher education is concerned, you find the difficulty level of a question to be slightly higher than what you would find in the recruitment process asked by recruiters. Same way, slightly advanced concepts like functions or the number of questions that come in geometry, etc., is lower as far as placements are concerned. So in placements, they're asking more of real world problem solving questions, which the student kind of will find it more relevant to answer. The more theoretical topics like functions, graphs, etc. do not come here. So that is also, it's a little easier. The average difficulty level of a question is also easier here.
All right, thanks, Karthik. I think that's about time for today's webinar. Thank you all for participating. We hope to bring you more guests in the future. Starting next week, we are trying to bring in external participants and panelists to the webinar. Please look out for announcements. The Face Pulse webinar series is exclusively for TPOs. So kindly check the WhatsApp image before forwarding it to students. If it says exclusively for TPOs, we restrict attendance only to faculty, TPOs, management, etc. We don't allow students to participate in some of the webinars. So thank you once again for participating. We hope to interact with you in the subsequent webinars starting next week. Thank you, everyone. And once again, thank you, Karthik, for taking us through the different salient features of aptitude exams.
Thank you.